Good morning. Welcome to our presentation. My name is Matt. This is Finbar and Emma, and today we're going to speak to you about our valuation of the Group X pension scheme. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask at the end. So, our task was to carry out an actuarial valuation of the Group X pension scheme as of the 5th of April 2010 for the purpose of enabling trustees to observe asset funding relative to the overall value of the scheme and concluding with a surplus or deficit. Valuation was completed using the SuperVal pension software, and then the results were checked using Microsoft Excel. The purpose of this presentation is to take you through our valuation and highlight the different steps taken in its completion following the orders shown on the screen now. Finbar is going to take you through our asset and data summaries, where he will describe the demographic structure of the scheme and the spread of its assets and liabilities. He'll also explain the structure of our assets and how they have been allocated. Next, Emma will speak about the limitations in effect due to the assumptions of our evaluation and how we accounted for them by way of a sensitivity analysis. She will also highlight certain actions that could be implemented in the future in order to reduce the liabilities of the scheme. To begin with, I'm going to speak about the assumptions we made before carrying out our valuation. Before conducting the evaluation, we had to make certain financial and demographic assumptions. These are our assumptions and the reasons we chose them. First of all, is interest rate. The graph here shows the percentage change of the FTSE All-Share Index over a number of years, and we use this to calculate an estimate for the expected pre- and post-retirement interest rates. We did this by calculating the average change, which came out as 7.692%. We agree that this is quite high and therefore settled for an interest rate of 6% for both pre- and post-retirement, as we cannot make an accurate prediction for the future. The next graph illustrates the change in RPI since April 1990, and it was used to calculate an assumption for inflation. The average change from the graph is 3.1, so the assumption we made for inflation was 3%. This next slide shows all our other assumptions. First of all, there's salary growth. This is related to RPI, but usually slightly larger, so we chose 4% for salary growth. And to make an assumption for the proportion of the members married, we used figures from the 2001 census. This data produced approximations of 80% for males and 70% for females. Wives are also assumed to be 3 years younger than husbands. And to make the next three assumptions, we used PMA 92 and PFA 92 base actuarial tables because they are recent appropriate set of mortality tables. From these tables, we give mortality of both pre- and post-retirement non-pensioners a rating of -3. This is because improvements in healthcare since 1982 mean that people are expected to live longer today. However, post-retirement pensioners were not given an age rating because, as they are already significantly older than the rest of the population, improvements in healthcare are not likely to affect their life expectancy. I'm going to hand it over to Finbar now to speak about data and asset summaries.
Thanks, Matt. The scheme consists of 968 members who are separated into three groups: active, deferreds and pensioners. In the deferreds category we have 373 members, in actives we have 346, and in the pensioners category there's 255 members. Within each of these categories, all members were assigned to a group ranging from 1 to 5. The group a member is placed in determines the pension increases that they will receive, and the categories are summarised in the table shown. As we can see, if a member was placed in Group 1, they would receive 0% interest on their pre- and post-97 pension figures. In Group 2, members would receive 0 return on pre-97 figures, but would receive interest to the value of RPA, which we calculated to be 3% on post-97 figures. In Group 3, members would gain 3% interest on both pre- and post-pension figures, whilst Group 4 earn the RPA rate of interest on pre-97 figures and 4% earnings after 1997, and those in Group 5 earn 4% interest on all pension earnings. Each of these groups is made up of both males and females, and the graphs shown indicate this. On the x-axis we show the different categories, and the y-axis indicate how many males and females there are, and males are shown in the darker colour while females in the lighter shade. And now here we have a table showing the assets that are held by the company. Equities currently stand at 75 million, whilst liabilities, shown here in relation to their various categories, total over 93 million, with the pensioners bearing the brunt of this. The difference is £18 million, and the funding level is currently at 80.3%. This is the benefit that has already been accrued in the scheme, and if it is brought up to 100% within the next 10 years, then additional contributions of 16.09% of salary would be needed. In order to cover future service liabilities, a future service rate has been calculated. It currently stands at 75.75% and is based on the ratio between future service liabilities of the active members and present value of 1% salaries over the next 16 years, which is the time from average age to retirement. The total of all the other necessary additional contributions on the future service rate had to give an indication of what will be needed to fund the scheme as a whole. And the asset summary, the total market value of the scheme's assets is of course 75 million. In the long term, the trustees expect that equities will provide a higher return on investment than bonds and gilts. This explains why there is a 100% equity funding rate within the scheme. This may not be the best choice for investment due to the volatility of equities, as they're one of the most volatile securities that are available to investors. This means that depending on different economic factors which affect the market, such as changes in inflation and interest rate, can cause prices to fluctuate wildly. As a result of this fluctuation, the value of the assets within the scheme will also vary, which will lead to a large difference in funding levels. If there was an extreme change, such that the value of equities falls immensely, the deficit which the scheme incurs may become so huge that the company may never be able to meet the obligations for payments which it has. As a solution to this and to minimise the risk within the pension scheme, we believe that assets must be allocated within different investments. The assets must be diversified between gilts, corporate bonds and domestic equities, as well as other equities. The inclusion of corporate bonds reduces the risk, as they are less risky than equities due to the indenture contract between the holder and the issuer, whereby the holder has a claim on the assets of the issuer in case of default. Corporate bonds can be sold to compensate for the loss of investment, which would recoup some of the amount that was lost. UK gilts are also less risky and are actually assumed to be risk-free. Both domestic and other equities are included to give more portfolio diversification. The other equities are from foreign markets or private sector equities. We plan to place 25% in UK gilts, 25% in corporate bonds and 40% in domestic equities, while 10% are invested in the other equities. As we have diversified the portfolio of assets, we believe that Group X will be in a better position to increase asset performance in the current market conditions, and this will aid in reducing the funding deficit. I'll now hand you over to Emma, who will talk to you about sensitivity analysis, cost savings and the various conclusions that we have come to.
To carry out our sensitivity analysis, we modified our interest rate, inflation rate and salary growth assumption in order to assess the effect such alterations would have on the corresponding liabilities. It was necessary to carry out this analysis in order to be confident that the assumptions we chose were appropriate. Active and deferred members are particularly sensitive to changes in interest rate. The first table illustrates the revaluation results calculated for active members using the original interest rate of 6% and altered rates of 6.5, 5.5 and 4%. The results imply that a 0.5% change in interest rate can have a great impact on liabilities. The revaluation figure generated by a 0% increase in interest rate represents the liabilities when there is no interest. This process was repeated again for deferred members as shown. A 0.5 increase in interest rate would decrease liabilities by 11.8% compared to when 6% is used, and an increase in liabilities by 71.2% results from a 4% interest rate. Deferred members only are affected by inflation rate. On this occasion, we adjusted our inflation rate assumption of 3% by plus or minus 0.5%. The results infer that this alteration will have little effect on the liabilities of the scheme. The salary growth assumption affects active members, and again the revaluation was carried out using a plus or minus 0.5% amendment. The table demonstrates that a 0.5% increase in salary growth to 4.5% will increase liabilities by 6.2%. Due to the deficit of 18 million, we then tested several methods of cost saving. The first graph shown represents the scheme's liabilities when CPI is used instead of RPI. This proved an effective measure for decreasing costs. The yellow portion of each bar illustrates that the alteration has no effect on active members, but the green sections display a decrease in liabilities by 14.7% for deferreds. The next chart displays the change in liabilities when we move to a career average revaluation scheme, where each year's benefit accrual is matched to earnings in each year rather than the final year. Here liabilities have decreased by 8.5%. The bar chart below represents a change in liabilities due to differences in national retirement age. When retirement age is increased to 70, the liabilities of the scheme decrease by 10.4%. Another method of cost saving tested was to change the accrual rate from 60ths to 1/80ths. This lowered the rate at which the benefit was accrued during active service by a quarter. A cost saving of almost £10 million can be viewed in the graph on the left. The final chart represents the introduction of 0% increases on all future pension payments. This had a fairly large effect on decreasing the liabilities of the scheme. The process resulted in an 8.5% shift in liability payments. The overall saving is £10 million. Due to the assumptions made before running the valuation, the pension scheme was valued at £93 million. Because assets were calculated to be only £75 million, a deficit of £18 million was produced by the scheme. If funding level is to be increased to 100%, additional contributions of 16.09% of salary are necessary. We advise the trustees to make a change within its allocation of assets due to the high volatility associated with equities. We proposed a more mixed portfolio of UK gilts, equities and corporate bonds to create a more stable asset value. We analysed the reliability of our assumptions by carrying out tests and found that our assumptions were appropriate. From our investigation of cost-saving methods, we saw that a 0% increase in all future payments has the greatest impact on reducing liabilities for active members. Thank you all for listening and feel free to ask any questions.